Hello, my name is Byron Bridges. You just recently saw two segments, one of a teacher displaying English and discussing the topic in American Sign Language, or ASL. The other is a man using English typing on a teletype communication system, otherwise known as a TTY, but he is also signing ASL with someone else in the room. That is bilingualism. What does that mean? Individuals who use spoken languages typically describe bilingualism as the ability to use two languages you can easily switch between and are skilled in. Now you are going to see if deaf people from the deaf community explain bilingualism in the same way.
Bilingualism means that you can be skilled in ASL and English at the same time.
Bilingualism means that a person knows two languages. It depends on where you live, where you work, where your home is, and what languages are used in each place. For example, the languages you use at home is not the language you would use in other places. A second example would be if you move to a new place and you are learning that language, but you still use your old language with your family. A third example would be if school and home have different languages. A fourth example would be if your parents knew different languages. For example, one parent is from France and one parent is from Germany, and the children have to learn both languages. Bilingualism means that you know two languages. For example, I know MSL, or Mexican Sign Language, and ASL, American Sign Language, and I'm skilled in both fluently. If I'm signing in America, it would be natural to use ASL, but if I go to Mexico, then I sign MSL. If my relatives from Mexico come to visit me, then I will sign MSL with them, but if I visit my friends, I will use ASL. I can switch between both languages.
Bilingualism is signing in ASL and writing in English. You can read and write in English but also socialize with people in ASL. It serves different purposes and has many uses. With English, you can read the newspaper and write your homework in English sentences. Put all of that together and you're an expert.
What is bilingualism? For me, it means that you understand both ASL and English. I'm a hearing person who interprets spoken English to ASL and ASL to English.
Wow, those are really interesting. The deaf community explains that switching between signing and spoken English is the same process as switching between spoken languages such as Spanish and French. Next, we'll see how these individuals became bilingual.
I was born deaf into a hearing family. Up until I was 17 years old, I was only skilled in English and I didn't have any signing experience. I could read, write, and speak English. When I went to college at 17, I saw deaf people signing in the deaf world. It was so amazing, I continued to learn and immerse myself in ASL for 10 years. I realized ASL is important for me to know my identity in the deaf community, to know who I am. I am skilled in American Sign Language and English, but there's many different kinds of sign language, like Italian Sign Language or Quebec Sign Language. It feels so nice to know that there is more than one sign language.
What does bilingualism mean to me? I was born and grew up in Australia. Australia has their own sign language called Auslan. In our deaf community, there are many deaf parents and families. My parents and family are deaf. I grew up watching a lot of Auslan Sign Language, but I wasn't exposed to English. I remember learning how to switch between the two languages. Growing up, when I wanted something, I would point to ask permission. My mom would then sign to me yes or no. Later one day, I went to my aunt's. She knew she had to teach me another language. For example, I wanted an apple, so I reached up for one, and then I thought I'd better ask permission, so I asked my aunt. My aunt fingerspelled the letters Y-E-S. I looked at her and I was puzzled. I asked what Y-E-S meant. She signed back that Y-E-S meant yes. To check, I continued to reach for the apple, and she signed yes. I got the apple and began to eat it, so Y-E-S means yes, and yes means Y-E-S. That's when I began to understand. Since I entered the deaf school, I've been learning more English and how to transition between the two languages. Since I've arrived here in America, I've been learning American Sign Language. Now I know 3 languages.
How did I learn 2 languages? I grew up with deaf parents who use sign language. As I grew up, I quickly learned how to sign with my tiny little hands. My mom told me I was going to school soon. I was excited because I saw my sister go to school, and I wanted to go with her. My mom brought us to school. I remember walking in, holding my mom's hand. The superintendent greeted me. She said hi and was talking and signing at the same time. I was looking at her thinking her signing was unclear, but I kind of understood it. I looked around and saw the kids signing in a way that was different than what I was used to. I was really scared. I looked at my teacher. She was going slowly, and I started to learn English very slowly. I didn't understand why I couldn't write down what I was signing. I had to follow my teacher and copy what she would write. I didn't know why what I wrote was different. When I would go home and use the new signs that I learned, my parents, who were not familiar with the way the school signed either, told me that I should sign like we do at home. So going back and forth between home and school, I changed my language again and again to make sure everyone would understand me. I grew up in Mexico learning MSL. When I was 8, I moved to America and I went to a deaf school. When I would fingerspell to the teacher, I would use ñ, a Spanish letter not included in English. My teacher would correct me and say that ñ was used in MSL. In ASL, we use N. That was when I understood that I used 2 separate languages.
Up until I was 3, I didn't have a language. My parents tried to communicate with me by using gestures, but they didn't understand. After the age of 3, I remember I met a deaf couple. They noticed that I was also deaf, so they tried to sign to me. They could tell that I didn't understand them, so instead they tried to teach me some signs. That's when I began to identify and understand sign. Later, when I was 4 or 5, when I went to preschool, they had a deaf program. It was overwhelming at first. At the school, the teachers showed us English picture books, and that's how we learned English. English was strange at first with all of its different words, but eventually I understood. I used ASL by socializing with teachers and socializing outside of class.
I grew up hearing as a student who heard and spoke English, and then around the age of 18 or 19, I was interested in taking ASL courses. I took the course, I learned to sign slowly. Later, I took another course and began to improve. About 2 or 3 years ago, I became a certified interpreter and kept learning, and now my fluency is good enough.
It's interesting how both the deaf community and those who use spoken language become bilingual. The people who use spoken language learn through sound and the deaf community learn through visually. Wow, there are vast differences between their experiences growing up. What you will see next is how they use their bilingualism every day. I'm really curious to see its everyday use. Let's find out.
Every day I use English to read the newspaper. Often I'll read something interesting and share it with my roommate. We'll have discussions about it using ASL. Sometimes we disagree or agree about different things. I also have to read and write in English for class. The discussions are in natural ASL, not signing with English word order, but every day I use both languages.
I know 2 languages, and I use them every day. For example, I grew up in Australia, in the deaf community there. They have their own sign language called Auslan. Deaf people use the TTY. This is a phone deaf people use, which is a telecommunication device. When communicating using the TTY, you use English to type, and the newspapers are also in English. For reading and writing, you would also use English at the same time. Deaf people in the area use Auslan to communicate, and they switch easily between the 2 languages. So suppose I come here to America, and I'm awkward at becoming skilled in a 3rd language, American Sign Language. Here I learn to transition between ASL and English. English is used for reading, writing, newspapers, and captioning. If a friend from Australia comes here to visit America, I'll switch to using Australian Sign Language to explain things and interpret what the American deaf people are signing. I will interpret from ASL to Auslan and from Auslan to ASL. I'm skilled in switching between the 2 languages.
I use bilingualism in my life every day. For example, when I'm watching TV with English captions, I can follow what's going on with no problem. But sometimes my friends don't understand what they mean, and they'll ask me to explain them, and I'll explain what the English captions are saying in ASL to my friends. I can understand both languages. Yes, I use 2 languages every day. For example, when I'm in class and the teacher gives us homework, if I don't understand what the teacher wants from the assignment, I'll bring it to my classmates and we'll discuss it in ASL, so that we can more clearly understand what she wants. Once the assignment is clear, I will go sit down at the computer and write the paper in English.
If my friends and I go to a restaurant, we socialize in ASL, but we have to read the menu in English and discuss what we want to eat in ASL. When the waiter comes over and I point out words on the menu, sometimes the waiter doesn't understand, so we write down what we want to order instead. The waiter is able to read it and everything is fine.
How do you use both languages? Back when I was teaching English to deaf students, I would write English sentences on the board, and the students didn't understand, so I explained it in ASL, and then they understood. They were then able to understand both languages. We would start with English and move to ASL, separating the 2 languages, and they were able to improve in both languages.
What you recently saw how bilingualism functions differently between these 2 communities. People who use spoken language can switch languages while they are speaking on the phone, while deaf individuals use English to communicate over the teletypewriter and can use ASL for face-to-face interactions. The 2 communities function differently in how bilingualism is used. Both communities are able to transition easily between languages. Many deaf people have 2 or 3 different languages that they are fluent in. Now you will see those deaf individuals that were previously using ASL use other sign language. Oh, it's interesting. Anyway, I hope you learned something about the language variations. The experiences of being bilingual are fascinating. I hope that the people involved in the recording encourage more people to be understanding of bilingualism. Some parents and school administrators may not feel comfortable with their bilingualism, but we have shown here today that the deaf people are capable of being skilled in 2 or 3 different languages and can easily transition between them. Deaf people are able to know 2, 3, even 4 different languages. I hope that encourages you to empower more deaf children to learn 2 languages and what it means to be bilingual, because that's the goal. I hope this helps you support this idea. Thank you.